And now we're gonna have our next speaker. Are you ready, guys, for our next speaker? Siddharth Kshetrapal, Design Systems. When is it too early? Design System for Small Teams. I'm ending up my man seat. How do you feel, sir?
I feel good. How about you? How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Super pumped. Because, guys, we have okay, let me be honest with you. We have a private chat with our speakers, and we just exchange some messages back and forth because we need to make sure everything runs smooth. And pump up is the word of the night. See, so you're gonna share the presentation, and as usual, go with the flow.
Cool.
I'm adding it to stream. All right,
All right then.
go ahead,
I'm gonna
sir.
start a quick timer over here. Although I don't think I'll go over
Sure.
time. All right. Hello everyone. I'm Sid. Thanks for introducing me. And for this talk, it's kind of a story. So I need to take you back to 2017. In 2017, I just joined we started the design system team at Odd Zero with me and one designer, Fernando. And we built a bunch of things. We built like design tokens and design assets, component libraries. There's a bunch we did. Um, and then the company was big at the time. I mean, it's even bigger now, but it was like roughly 400 people back then. And since it started, we kind of like figured out where to put the design system team. And in Odd Zero, the design system team was in like the design org of it. And that's really interesting because we were kind of sitting next to the visual designers, product designers, illustrators, instead of sitting with like the front end folks. And it's interesting because we did a bunch of like being in the design team, we did a bunch of like post-it notes. Sometimes we wore hats while doing post-it notes. I'm not a designer, I'm a developer, but I spent a lot of time in the design team. And, I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot. But we kind of have to talk about what does it mean to build a design system. And it depends on like each company. Uh, I love this definition from Kari Saarinen, who said a design system is a set of multidisciplinary, shared, integrated principles and patterns that define the overall design of the product. That's a long one, so let's break it down. What is a design system? It's a set of principles and patterns. So by principles, we mean like rules and guidelines about colors, what's the tone of the brand, and even down to things like what's the spacing strategy. And patterns are things like your repeatable, reusable blocks. So this could be your CSS library, this could be your Figma asset folder, this could be like a sketch library, it could be React components. All of that are like repeatable patterns. And it only becomes like you can only like qualify it to be a design system if these are shared and integrated. So shared between designers, developers, product managers, like everyone in the company has the same principles and patterns that they consume, and it's integrated into their workflow. So the processes and the tools people use every day. So if your designers use Sketch or Framer, Figma, whatever, it's available there. But also your developers can use it, your marketing can use it, what's the tone, what's the voice of the brand, what colors to use. So it's in everybody's flow. And the goal of this, of course, is to define and improve the overall design of the product. That's kind of the overarching goal of building a design system. So, what did it mean for us to build a design system? Like, just to remind you, we're sitting in the design org. So, we built a lot of design assets and like we used Sketch at the time, the Sketch libraries, but we were also shipping code for the front end developers to use. So imagine this, like should designers code, and then like that whole debate around that. And this was like, should the design team build our React components for us and then give it? So there was a lot of confidence building that we had to do. uh, this is an example. This is one of the more interesting components that we build. So it's a page header, and if you look at it, it has a very mechanical React API. So you declare the page header with JSX, you give it the title, description, and then it takes two actions. This is the interesting part. So when you're writing this API, you don't really know what would it do visually. All you know is like, this is what I want to tell the user, this is the information, and these are the two actions related to it. And this is what it renders. And if you look at it carefully, there are like a few obvious decisions that have already been made for you. So for example, there's like the clients, like the title appears on the left, the buttons on the right, and the description is below it. You can't really tell that when you look at the mechanical API. But then there are more things. It's like, is the clients that you say, is that an H1 tag or an H2 tag, right? So that's important semantics. And then the buttons, which one comes first? Does the primary come first, secondary come first? What's the gap between the two buttons? What's the gap between the first row and description? When a screen reader tries to read this, for accessibility, should it read the buttons first? I imagine it would read the title first, but then second, should it go to the buttons or should it go to the description? All of these decisions are kind of baked into this. So, which kind of means like we encourage the developers of the application to think about their users. And then we offloaded a lot of the design and quality decisions. Like, is this like how to make this responsive, how to make this accessible, what are the actions here? All of that was baked into the component. And this all of this like was kind of inspired from this post that Brad Frost wrote. He wrote up. I have a link in the end of the slides to all of the articles I mentioned, but he kind of mentioned the concept of the front of the front end and back of the front end. So in this part of the article, he hinted that the front end ecosystem itself is too big for any one person to kind of understand all of it, or at least like be an expert of all of it. So you have folks that need to do the styling and accessibility piece, the right semantics, and then on the other spectrum, you have folks that are looking at what's the best way to load, fetch just the right amount of data with something like GraphQL, and then thinking about how do we make this type safe. So there's a big spectrum, and then he kind of said that it makes sense to think of our front end as front of the front end and back of the front end. And it really helped us because I spent a lot of time on the front of the front end, and which meant that we really nailed down some of the details, like pixel perfect, responsive, accessible, good API. But we were able to just completely ignore parts like how does state get handled, or how do you even fetch the description for the page header I showed. All of that was the application developer's responsibility. So that's like part one of the story. And then in 2019, when the world was shining and, before 2020, I moved to this different company called Code Sandbox. And Code Sandbox is now 11 employees. And that's a very different company. So from 400 something to 11. And what I saw is that even with 11 people, we kind of had the same problems where the 2 pages of the application look like they're built by 2 different people. There's no strong brand, and there's inconsistency. You fix a bug in one part of the code base, it doesn't communicate to the second part. So we realized that a lot of the problems that we were seeing were the exact problems that I was trying to solve with design systems at a bigger company. So we had the same problems. And I'm very aware, like, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So because I worked on design systems, I thought all of these problems should be solved in design systems. And in an 11-member company, you like obviously can't justify creating a design system team, let alone me being able to justify spending all my time working on design system. Like I contribute to the product part of it quite a bit. So then I started thinking about, okay, let's go back to the definition. It's like what I said earlier was that it's a set of tools that can be shared by the team and it's integrated in the process. So what if instead of looking like a hammer, I start looking at it like a Swiss Army knife? And so then I noted down what are all the tiny parts in this Swiss Army knife, and there's like a bunch of things. Like just to mention a few, we had design tokens, we had some CSS classes, React components, a lot of documentations, usage guidelines, But then there are also things like release scripts and code mods and theming support and the icon workflow. So there's a bunch of varied things across the board. By the way, I thought like it'd be really cool if in this talk, like I flipped the real Swiss Army knife. So I went on Amazon. It's like $74. I was like, yeah, that's the. I'm not doing that for a gimmick, but it does come in dark mode. So if that's kind of cool. Uh, but this is what I found in that hunt. It's like they're also like tinier Swiss Army knives, right? Like just two things in the same format, and it's like a lot cheaper. And it's like that's a great analogy for what it might look like to have one of those Swiss Army knives in a small team. Like you just have a few tools, you don't have the whole thing because you probably don't need the whole thing yet, and you can keep adding them later. So that's kind of the rest of the stock, which is tiny design systems for tiny teams. And what does that tiny Swiss Army knife look like? So I stole five things. Basically, I stole five things from the big company design system world, and these are the five things. The first one is constraint based design. So the concept of constraint based design is that instead of choosing from like all the infinite possibilities when you're designing something, you pick from a predefined set of things, which is the constraint that you add. So you can do this with typography. For example, these are our scales. So you see there's like 10 pixel, 12 pixel, 13, 16, 19, 23, 28. There's like skip, and just these seven or eight that we have give us a good enough set that we can depict our entire UI. And then, when you're at 16 pixel and you think I want something smaller, you go to 13. There's no hit and try. There's not much thinking. And all of these are on like a mathematical scale. So they're supposed to aesthetically look good. All of that is taken care of. And the good thing is like all of our tools understand this. So in Figma, you can actually add these as variables. They call them variables or they call them tokens. I forgot, but you can add them and then you see them on the right hand side. Similarly, you can do the same with colors. So you can have these are all our grays and some of our blues. And then on the right, you'll see these are all of our colors laid out in our uh, color styles. Now, this is where it gets interesting, where after you define all your like variables, like these are all the hex codes, like you see these are all like we just call them gray 100, 200, 300. As long as there is a scale, the numbers are not that interesting. But the second layer of these tokens is where it's interesting. Like you have variables and then you have decisions sitting on top of them, sitting on top. So for example, this first token, I call it text body. And because we're like a dark app, we use white text for enough contrast. And so that style is called text body. And this is a new variable, which is just an alias to, I think, like gray 100. And then we have a text subtle, which is another decision token. And that is an alias to the grayest we could get while still keeping it accessible. And then you have link and destructive, which are aliases for some blue or some red. I don't even know. But like once you configure them, you don't really need to remember what it is. So now like when you get into designing like features and stuff, so this is one of the screens from Code Sandbox. And you can see like even in Figma, when you're designing something, you can say, give it the color of this one has text body. And I can try to change it. And then, you see all of the font sizes that we have. So we name them as body 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, when you go from 3 to you want a little bigger, you go to 4 and it's already configured. Same thing for colors. So you see the two color things are different color. The second one is called text subtle. And this is what like our designer is working with, right? So he's not working with hex codes. He's working with, I say he because like Danny is our one designer in the team. Danny is working with release code. So when he wants that, he goes with text body, text subtle, text link. And the same stretches out for spacing. So we use the 4-point grid, which means all of our margins and paddings are on the 4 scale. So there's like, it's a multiple of 4. So you have 0, 4, 8, 6, 12, 16, blah, blah. And what's interesting is that Figma doesn't have tokens for space like it does for font and color. So I find it really funny that Danny actually has these tiny squares that he keeps on the left of his prototype so that he can put things and map them out. So I showed you can do this with typography, colors, and space, but you can really do it with anything. So, for example, border radius. This is what a border radius looks like. So we call them small, medium, large. It doesn't really matter what you call them as long as you call it the same thing in your design assets and in the code. And this is kind of the goal. This is a conversation you're trying to avoid. Like this never happens in the team where he's like, "Hey, I asked like this Danny is like, what's the color of the error state?" And Danny's like, "Oh yeah, let me check it up." And he's like, "Okay, this is the hex code." And I was like, "Cool, I'm gonna copy paste it in my CSS." By the way, interesting to note that Slack actually renders the hex code with like a little square because that's how far we are with this. It's like our chat app understands hex code. Like that has to sound a little weird to you, right? Um, Now, how do you represent these colors in code? So there are multiple ways of doing it. You can do it with CSS variables or Sass or less, or you can do it with JavaScript if you're using React, if you're using CSS and GS with React. Really up to you. There's no real pro and con on the surface of it for tokens. We choose the left approach with JavaScript objects because that's just like a bunch of our code is in JavaScript. And these are what our colors look like. So what's interesting to note is that we have a bunch of grays, like we almost have the full spectrum. We have a few blues and there are gaps in between, like there's 300, 500, there's no 400 because we're not sure. We might need one more. So we're just keeping that gap for us. There's red and then green, purple, yellow, orange is just one because those aren't very prominent in our app. So this is still the variable layer. And you do the same thing with all of this. So we have font sizes, space, even transition speeds, like animations, we speed them, we put them in these tokens. We have our radius, our shadows, our breakpoints. And this JavaScript object spec is based on system UI. So if you want to look at the spec, if you want just like a common thing to follow instead of reinventing it, systemui.com is a good resource. And so after I've defined the variables, this is where the decision layer comes in. And because we're using JavaScript objects, our alias is just like referencing the thing. So we can extend this. I can say tokens.colors.text and add another object and say, this is my body color. So remember, text body color is just alias to gray 100. And I'm literally just referencing the JavaScript variable because it's all objects. So I have link, which is blue 600, and text destructive or text danger, which is red 500. Cool. So after we've defined our tokens for constraints, the second thing I stole from big design system world is really good primitives. Let me show you how. So you want your tokens to convert to components. And with React components, we kind of really have like a good, what do you say, like a good box already. It's like a very good model for this. So let's focus on, like, this is what Code Sandbox looks like. So let's focus on just the left sidebar. And if you had to recreate this, I can use my text component. Text is like a primitive for which just renders a span. And I put the title and the description. And on the left, you see what's in Figma, what I want to achieve. On the top right, you see code. Top bottom is how it renders without any stats. So when I put two text layers, it just renders below each other. And then I actually can go in Figma, check what's the font size that my designer was thinking about. And I can see the font size is body 3 and the color is text body. So I can go ahead and in my text primitive, I can say size 3. Now this is the main part where whatever it's called in your design tool is exactly what it's called in my React components with props. So when I say body 3, I know the text size is the third one, and that's why it's called text size 3 because I want the same exact. And the color for the second one is text subtle, so I can say variant is subtle. I could have also called it color is equal to subtle. There's preference. Maybe color is equal to subtle was actually better. And then you see like the UI is really coming around, but there's like a gap here. So you see on the left, there's an eight pixels gap. Now 8 is on my scale of 4 points, which is 2 into 4 is 8. And then we have like a stack primitive. So a stack primitive is just like a glorified flex box, and it understands direction. So flex column or flex row. And when you say stack direction is vertical, you're stacking them one below each other. And when you say gap 2, it applies the margin between the children, right? So now you can actually do this with flex gap. I'm not sure how good that support is, but when we started it was pretty new. So we actually do this by margins. So there's a margin on the first text which puts it down. And now you see like it's kind of looking very close. And this is how far you can get with primitives. I didn't really write any CSS, or I didn't really make any style decisions here. All I'm doing is like referencing my constraints that are already defined. Let me give you another example to just like nail down the point. So on the left, you see there is this stats component, and then we show a few stats, but it's made up of a bunch of things. And you see the spacing, the size of the icon. There's a few decisions here. So to build, oops. So to build this component, what you'd end up doing is like I'm looking at what the size is. It's text subtle body 3, which means I need a text size 3, variant subtle, and I get that first one in. Now I need an icon, and I know the icon is also subtle. Now when I put the icon, what we do is all of our icon use current color, like the SVG fill is current color, which means if you wrap it in a text and make the text subtle, then the icon will also get the same fill, because current color just takes whatever it's wrapped in, like the container's color. And then I put this in a horizontal stack. So stack is horizontal by default. And to see like what's the gap in between, it's 4 pixels, which is 1 unit. So I just say gap is 1 unit. And I copy this because there's a bunch of things, wrap all of that in a stack. And then I need to see what's the gap between two of these values. It's 16 pixels. So I can just put stack gap is 4, and that would render it. And I change the icons and then copy. So just doing this much, like if you look at it, there's just 3 components used here. There's stack, text, and icon. And if you use the right primitives, if you build really good primitives for yourselves, you can get really far with just like basic building blocks, which are connected to your token system or your theming system. So the first two are honestly the main ones. Even if you're not building a design system, you can just take tokens and good primitives that are connected to tokens and get really, really far with it. And the next 3 are more like optional depending on where you work, what kind of application you build. So the third one is the theming system. And this really depends on like, does your application support themes? Does it have a dark mode, light mode, multiple themes? With Code Sandbox, we kind of have a lot of themes. So because it's like runs VS Code, we support a bunch of VS Code themes, which means our entire editor is themable, including like light theme, or you can go for like a purple theme. I think there's one of those. Yeah, there's shades of purple, which means like the application is immensely themable. And how we achieve that, and I think this is of course like stretching it a little because that's our use case, but I think the principles are still solid, and you can take it to the extreme to a level that works for you. So when I say tokens goes to components, there's a bit more for us here, which is tokens and the VS Code theme get mushed together and create a UI theme, which is also a JavaScript object, and that is what is fed into the components. So what this looks like is VS Code has a bunch of like, if you look at a VS Code theme, it already defines a bunch of things like sidebar background, sidebar foreground, borders, a few things. But then we also have additional elements, like we have a switch and a menu list and an avatar, things that VS Code, being a code editor, doesn't really have, but we have on top of it, around it, in the sidebar, etc. So we define these things and add it to our UI theme. And most of the time it's based on the theme itself. So we try to use the theme to create, like we try to use the VS Code theme to create a UI theme out of it, so that it seems cohesive and it doesn't feel like it feels like it's part of the same theme. And we simply do this by extending using the same values that exist in the theme. So if you look at this avatar image, what's interesting is that beyond like the boring like make it round and all of that, we use border color, which says avatar.border. An avatar, the background and the border both are the same, which is avatar.border. And when you look at the text variants, its body is inherit, subtle is muted foreground, link is link foreground, destructive is error foreground, and an active button uses button.background. And these are very, like when you look at this, there is no CSS, there is no style behavior here. All it says is like map it to the theme property, and the theme actually makes all of these decisions. So a link might be blue 300, like our brand blue 300, or it could be pink or like a light shade of purple, depending on the VS Code theme. So the component really has no clue what theme it's going to get. But what it can always rely on is that link foreground would always exist and muted foreground would always exist. And so that when you're changing theme, you're never really touching the components, you're touching the layer before it. And I think that creates like a very powerful theming system because the components always render one thing and all your decisions are based on the token layer. Cool. The icon workflow is interesting. Another thing I stole. We had a pretty robust automated icon workflow for the Auth0 design system, but it didn't make sense to go that far because honestly, our icons we're not really sure what our icon set is yet. We keep defining them as we go, and if you and that's why I kind of included this because a workflow doesn't have to be like fancy or it doesn't have to be high tech as long as it's shared and integrated and it's part of your process. That's your design system process. It doesn't have to be anything special. Our process literally is there's a Figma file called icons. So every icon that we use, we dump it here. It's on this like 16 by 16 square. That's it. And then we right click copy as SVG and put it in icons.tsx, like the TypeScript file with all our icons. We just keep dumping them there. And you can see by the number of lines, it's like at almost 400 lines. It's a bunch of icons there. It's like 20-ish icons already, or maybe more. But we follow the same rule that it's an SVG. It's 16 by 16. That's the only rule. And then the fill is always current color so that it can be filled by, it's like, you can wrap it in something. If it's a link, you can make it blue. And that kind of is our icon flow. That's it. You copy it to the Figma file. Oh, I also have a demo. Perfect. Okay. So, and what this gives us, like if you put it in this file, what you get out of it is that you get an autocomplete. So you can say icon and you can say name and you get an autocomplete, right? So you know what icons are present. And then if you wrap it in something, you also get the color of the parent. In this demo, you can also see there's a size. So there's a size 12, which is a custom size, and the default size is 16. So sometimes you need to like tweak the size. You can do that with the size prop. And that is kind of it. Like the process is that simple. There's a Figma file, you dump it there, make sure it's 16 by 16, then copy it, put it in icons file, make sure you use current color. That's the process. It's a small team, so everyone understands the process. It's shared and integrated enough, and that works. So that this was just to show an example. Like it doesn't have to be fancy. Your process is whatever works for your team. Finally, like this is something that I'm not sure a lot of people do, which is visual testing. And this was extremely beneficial with the big design system world. So I had to steal it for small design system world. I don't think we can work without this. And the long story is pretty short that we just use this tool called Chromatic. So what Chromatic does is if you use Storybook and you write stories, it will take your stories and create visual snapshots. I think it will take screenshots, like actual photos of it. And then through your commits, it will compare the photo. So if the visual snapshot has changed, it will tell you that something has changed and you need to approve it. So in essence, like in what do you say? In principle, it's like just snapshots, but it's a lot more useful because when you're talking about UI components, you actually want to see them. Just what CSS or what class has changed doesn't help. You want to like be visually able to see what has changed. More interestingly, what this has really helped is like because we have very low level primitives, when a primitive changes, there are so many components that get affected. And because we have stories for some of the more complex components like a menu or a table, you can actually see when you change a stack or when you change a text primitive, these four components also changed. And then you can look at the visual diff and you can say, all right, this was intentional. Or what happens to me a lot is like, oops, this is a total regression. I didn't mean to do this, and you undo it. And honestly, like with an application with so many pages or so many like configurations, it's really hard to test all of them manually, like visually when you're doing it. And like unless you have like a very good design eye, you probably won't even see the minor things that happen when you change primitives. So that's it. Like that's the whole story. Like we use Chromatic. You should do if you can. And that's kind of it. Those are my 5 top things that I stole from big design system world. Let me just recap. There's constraint based design, which is use design tokens. There is good primitives, create React components for yourself that are pretty low level, but are connected to your tokens. So that when your designer says, let's use let's use a subtle text of size 3, it means the same thing, right? Or when he says, let's put an error here, you don't have to ask which color because it obviously is error foreground color, right? Like all of that is like a common language for you. And then theming system, if you have a theming system, don't put it in your components, put it in your theming layer, super powerful. And then the fourth one is have an icon workflow or a workflow for like anything that you need, and it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be as primitive as rudimentary as you need. As long as it's shared, it's a process, it's a part of your design workflow, it's part of your design system. And do visual testing. You'll be impressed by how useful it can be. So these are the 5 things I picked for our tiny Swiss Army knife. And yeah, I encourage you to create your own Swiss Army knife and steal all of these ideas from big design system world, even into front-end applications. And hopefully you'll find something useful. So all of the links from the talks I mentioned, like Brad Frost's article about design tokens, are on this link. It's on sid.st/react global. And yeah, if you like what I hear, if you like what you hear, if you like what, oh my God, if you like what I have to say, then follow me on Twitter. That's my handle. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. It was an impressive speech.
Thank you.
So we got still 9 minutes until the next speaker. And before we go, I would like to suggest you join me in the conversation. How do you feel about the speech? Have you had the chance to see what guys been replying in the chat session? Let me
No, I haven't.
let me read it
Yes,
for
go
you
for
then.
it.
Let me interrupt you and read it for you. Oh, I see. All right. Everrain commented. Oh, I see. All right. That's good. I like it. And then the next one. Damn, see, this is really good. Wow, this is really amazing from Harshish Venkatesh. And then Tejas Kisaria said, awesome, sir. And what I can do is only repeat the same words.
Nice. I'm glad folks liked it. I hope it's useful. They can apply some of this back into their jobs.
Sure. What was the most complicated part for you? Not the complicated, but maybe tiresome before this conference when you were preparing what you were thinking about. Just adjusting my seat, guys. I'm sorry. I need to do it to feel comfortable.
I didn't get your question.
Yeah, preparing for this conference, what was the most exciting part for you and most tiresome part? Like you hated it. Like if you go back in time
Yeah.
on Falcon 9 SpaceX, if you go back in time, like what do you think is the worst thing preparing for this conference?
All right. So the best thing is that I really like this topic. Like I really like talking about design system. I used to do it full time, and now I just like smuggle things in when I can, like still wired in. So I really like that part, and I like sharing it. So that's the best part. The most annoying part, to be honest, was like there's so much weird things that we do in the company in Code Sandbox, like the application.
Okay.
That's like our theming system is wild. It's like nobody should have to support like the entire ecosystem of VS Code themes. And it's
Hmm.
like there's some weird stuff out there. Like there are themes that are actually good, like Cobalt, but they have very interesting choices. Like they use purple and they use yellow on top of it. And it looks really good in VS Code because like you use accent colors not too much. But when you create a UI around it, it
Okay.
just looked ugly. Then
I
it's
mean,
like we took that and made it pretty, and then like we made like a lot of like weird choices and hacks to make it work. And I can't share any of that because it's like it's super interesting, but nobody has these weird problems, right? So it's like the hardest part I think was like what are the interesting parts that I should keep and what are just weird things that only we do that nobody would find interesting. There are a lot of
So
like
it's
filtering to do.
it is always like that, and that's the thing I needed to say because 90% of what you said I didn't understand. Anyways, yeah, no, because your speech is clear as water from the waterfall. I'm just, you have to be in that ecosystem, right? To understand how to be one of you guys, and I hope
Yeah.
I might become one of you guys.
I mean, you're sitting here like talking to so many people. There's no way you can know about all of this, right?
Sure. Yeah, it's nice that people understand that because it's also a job as a moderator is not uh, prevent any information from flowing, like not to do stupid jokes, which I'm trying hard not to do. But I'm sorry, guys, in chat, just comment if you want more stupid jokes. I'm gonna go with it.
We should go with it. Yeah. Let it flow.
If I was an independent contractor, maybe, but we all have the responsibility. But how is the weather, anyways?
Oh, it's such a good day. So I don't know if you can tell, but it's like 10
What,
p.m.
what
So you can't see the other side of the room because it's literally just like this one light for like my face to
saying
look
it,
okay.
it's 10 p.m. right now.
Yeah, it's 10 p.m. But it's like a really beautiful day. Spent like before this, I was in the park doing a
So
picnic.
you're in Europe.
Yeah, so I'm sitting in Amsterdam. It's like the
All right.
last days of summer. So I'm just
Look,
trying to
there is some comment.
absorb all of it in.
I just pulled up some comments from the chat. Great talk, sweet. Thanks. Yeah, Mitch. Mitch is quite empathetic, but I like
Processor work.
Matheus Doi Santos. I hope I pronounced it correct, buddy. Nice talk. I love it. Exactly. Let it flow. Yes, still 3 minutes. So if you want to enjoy the party, you can be enjoying it with me because I really appreciate your help, Sid. I feel that we connected quite well right now. That we're almost like one universe.
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
how
for
do I
sure.
hide it? I hide it. Now I hide it. So what is your plan for the night? Gonna go to sleep or
Maybe play some FIFA, like just a little before I go to bed.
okay, which team?
It's team Barcelona.
So
It's
you
it's a
hide,
tough time
you
being a
hide.
Barcelona fan, but
So what about Messi? Is he leaving the
no, he's
team?
staying.
He's
He they,
staying.
they're not
They
letting him
offer
leave.
him millions of millions.
I mean, his release contract is like 700 million, so
Dude,
nobody has that kind of money.
should we start learning how to play football? It's too late. I mean, it's too late,
I
but
think
at
it's too
least we can
late.
convince ourselves. But in our minds, can we convince ourselves to go to the coach and tell him, dude, we're gonna be millionaires. Just trust me.
Like I'll take
We don't-
1% of what Messi takes and I'll play.
yeah. I love what Barbara Hernandez saying. Barbara said this was such a cool way to approach themes. I loved it. We loved
Thanks.
it too, Barbara. Thank you, and we are very appreciative of you being here. Both of us as a guys on TV and as a team of Geekle, because behind this event there is a lot of young boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen who made it possible. And yeah, there is another comment before I go too dramatic. FIFA will be our future.
Oh
And
damn. That'd be cool.
he nailed it. He
That'd be
nailed
cool.
it.
I can't wait for
Yeah.
that.
Okay, Sid. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's almost time for our next speaker, Anisha Swain. I'm gonna connect with her and hope to see you on Q&A.
Yeah, see you in a bit.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye.